Mr. Christa, you had an after-death contact with your father. How did you experience this?
Ja, es war Folgendes, und zwar muss ich erzählen.
I have to say in advance that, before my father died, I had problems with my wife. I was very used to the fact that my father always had an open ear for the worries and problems of his children, and since my marriage was so difficult at the time, I told him about it and that I might have to leave my family. Then he said, "Do you people always have to separate right away nowadays?" He said that people used to stay together longer, they didn't separate so quickly when there were problems, so he wasn't very enthusiastic about my intention to break up. Half a year later, he died. And another 6 months later, I actually separated from my wife. This situation was very difficult for me. Then one day I thought about my father and I asked him inwardly, "Dad, I would like to know what you think about the fact that we have actually broken up now. It would just interest me." At the time, I thought it should be possible to make such a contact, and I asked him inwardly to get in touch with me. About 3 days passed and I didn't even think about my wish to get an answer from him. Then one night I went to bed, I was well on my way to sleeping, almost passed out, when suddenly I was wide awake. Even though my body was almost asleep, my consciousness was more awake than ever before in my life. In addition, it got very bright, as if the light had been turned on, and I heard a noise like in the radio, a kind of buzzing. It was pretty loud. Suddenly my father was perfectly clear in front of me, but only his face, no body. The face was about 8 inches in front of me and I saw it with full clarity, every single line. He died at the age of 86, but when he appeared to me he looked significantly younger, about 70. I also smelled his signature cologne at that moment and heard his breath. Then he said to me, "Robert, you alone must know that." Then there was that noise again, my father disappeared, the light disappeared, and I immediately fell back into the phase of falling asleep, from wide awake to a twilight state, very suddenly. Then I thought to myself for a moment, "Hey, my father just got in touch with me, I have to remember that." Because I was already very tired, I worried that I'd fall asleep right away and then maybe forget it. So I thought, he said to me, "Robert, you alone have to know that. I have to remember that." And then I was gone, fast asleep. It was only after about 3 days that I remembered this incident. Suddenly I thought that there was something significant. Then I immediately remembered what he said to me. "Robert, you alone need to know that." It was clear to me that this was an absolutely real situation. Then I also remembered that a few days earlier I had asked him to contact me, and that wish had been fulfilled. It then also occurred to me that in that suddenly awake state, I was not in bed. I felt like I, the real me, was out of my body with my consciousness, and that I met my father on a different level. You could also say I approached him and he approached me. This encounter lasted very briefly, and afterward I had immediately gotten tired again and fallen asleep. Believe it or not, I personally know for a fact that it was absolutely real. You can't describe it. All I can say is it was totally real. It was by no means just a dream, because I know what a dream is. Dreams are always kind of faded, blurred, but this encounter was real. It strengthened my belief in 2 things. First, that my father still exists. I had hoped so before, but I wasn't convinced. After this event, I know it. And secondly, that there is no death in general, but that death is a transition for every human being. Life continues immediately, you leave the body and move on. I know this now, and I am no longer afraid of death. For example, my aunt recently had her funeral. I used to have this negative feeling about death, like, that person is gone, their life is just over. But now I feel that this person is not in the grave, but is perhaps standing next to me. And I would like to convey that to other people as well. Death should lose its horror, because it is only a transition. If you are aware of this, I think you can live more calmly.
Das soll man einfach sich bewusst machen und dann lebt man auch viel leichter, meine ich. Das möchte der Welt einfach mitgeben mit diesem Interview.
Also obwohl das so
So even though the experience was so brief, you're absolutely convinced that it was real.
Absolut real.
Yes, absolutely real. Of course I can't prove it. Others can only believe it or not, but as for me personally, I know it. I also felt very comfortable in this encounter. I wasn't afraid. It was completely familiar, as if it were completely normal. It wasn't uncomfortable or scary at all.
Und als das so sagte,
And when he said this sentence, Robert, you alone must know that. How did you perceive that? Was it auditory, like we hear with our ears, or was it somehow different? And did he move his mouth too?
It was like here on earth. He moved his mouth, and when the contact was discontinued I could still feel the sound of the voice in my body. It was fully present. It wasn't like a washed-out, transparent ghost, but absolutely plastic.
Also, es war kein Geist in dem Sinn, sondern es war wirklich wie ein 𝗵𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗏𝗃, sage ich mal.
Manche sagen ja auch,
And some also say that these deceased people somehow beamed in this state. So it's also typical that they appear younger, but sometimes it's also said that they had a kind of aura or were somehow radiant. Was that the case with you too?
die so eine Aura oder irgendwas ausgestrahlt haben. War das bei Ihnen auch?
No, actually not. It was very vivid and pleasant. He seemed younger, had a positive vibe, but there was no glow or anything. It wasn't glorified at all. But it was like in a kind of parallel world. An encounter on another level.
Would you say it was more real than here in the physical plane or just as real?
Gleich real, so vom Empfinden her.
It was fundamentally more real, but also unreal in the sense that it was different. Because it was on another level. It wasn't so tainted with our conventional, earthly sensibilities. On the one hand real like here, but also somehow different, indescribable. It had a very real, different quality of experience that is not known here on earth. I would even say that it was a higher quality of experience compared to here. And I only saw the head very large in front of me, without a body.
Were you disappointed that his answer was so short?
No, actually not. I also had the feeling that it was somehow an exception that such a contact was even possible. It felt like for once I could glimpse into another world for a moment, like when you turn the radio very precisely and briefly catch another plane, like it's a momentary stroke of luck that's otherwise difficult to reach, and suddenly this level was gone again. But I had no regrets because it was so short and to the point. I thought it was so great that I was even allowed to experience it at all.
Ja, so wie Sie das beschrieben haben mit diesem Geräusch.
The way you described it with this noise is reported again and again about the moment when one leaves the body.
Okay.
This buzzing noise is a typical symptom of the detachment. So have you tried to achieve that again afterwards? Did you feel the need to experience something like this again?
Danach versucht, dass Sie das wieder erreichen. Also hatten Sie dieses Bedürfnis, das nochmal zu erleben?
Yes, I have. After that I often asked other people to get in touch, but so far no further contact of this kind has occurred.
Well, you were a believer and you wished for that, but from the way you then experienced it, it can by no means be said that it was just a pipe dream, the result of faith and desire.
So eine Halluzination entsteht.
No, absolutely not. This desire was not so present in my perception at the time either. Even after the encounter, for the first 3 days afterwards, it wasn't that present in my feelings. If that was just a dream or a pipe dream, I wouldn't be so convinced of it today. Well, I keep trying to make contact with the spiritual world. With my father, with other deceased people, etc. And I also pray regularly. I spoke to a friend about it once and he asked why I don't pray directly to Jesus. He was of the opinion that Jesus wants us to turn to him directly. But at the time I had such an image of Jesus that I thought I wouldn't dare to approach him directly. But then I had a cheeky idea and I thought to myself, Jesus, if you exist, then show yourself or give me a sign. I also thought to myself how I would stand before Jesus as a human being, how he would judge me. Then I asked Jesus inwardly, Dear Jesus, do you love me just as I am? Even with my mistakes and weaknesses? I really wanted to know. I also had a slightly bad conscience. Then I also said internally, a bit cheekily, almost like a condition, if you love me the way I am, then send me a sign. I would like to see a €1 coin or a 50-cent coin somewhere in the next few days. Obviously. Not somewhere in the corner, but beautifully presented, so that it is completely clear to me that it comes from you. Then a few days passed and I went to a Steinway store in Munich with friends to buy a piano. We were there in this shop, 3 friends, me, and 2 salesmen. We stood there in a circle in the shop and talked about the pianos. Then suddenly my eyes went down and a 50-cent piece was lying exactly in the middle of the circle that the 5 of us formed, and also exactly in the middle of the Steinway logo on the carpet. And not only did it lie there, but indescribable rays emanated from it, beautifully glowing golden rays. I was completely fascinated and could no longer follow the conversation with the others. I was like faded out and magically enchanted. It didn't occur to me to touch and pick up that coin either. Eventually we moved somewhere else and a few minutes later the coin was gone. At first I thought someone lost this coin and then picked it up again. But there were hardly any people in the shop and I seemed to have been the only one who noticed this coin and the rays.
These rays, were they comparable to a light source like we have here on Earth, or were they different?
They also had another quality, a spiritual one. On the one hand, there were these very bright rays, and at the same time I felt absolute bliss. That was magical and sacred. The best thing to compare it to is suddenly meeting the love of your life and being enchanted for a moment. I also felt an intense love in that situation. I think I was the only one who noticed that. It was absolutely magical. I don't think it's just invention that there are these illustrations with the rays in churches, for example. For days after this experience I was still in an extraordinary state of happiness.
Couldn't it also be that nobody lost this coin and picked it up again, but rather that it materialized out of the spiritual?
Yes, that is conceivable. And it was exactly how I thought it would be when I formulated this wish at the time. I didn't want that coin to be somewhere in the corner, so I can't tell if it was coincidence or a sign. Rather, I wanted it to be presented specially, so that it was an unmistakable sign for me.
Mr. Christa, thank you very much for these descriptions.
You're welcome.
Sehr gerne.